Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you, featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today we have two people on our show. The first one is my guest, Michael Solomon. Now, Michael's been on my show before, and boy, if you want to have a little information that you may or may not like, it's listening to Michael. Now, today I'm also working with a co-host, and her name is Deidre Regal. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Deidre. She's a classically trained singer, dancer, pianist, and composer-conductor. This dynamically evolving woman has recently added author to her list of life accomplishments. I want to welcome to my show Michael Solomon and Deidre Regal.
Well, thank you, Susan. It's a delight to be joining the show with you, and a delight to be spending half an hour with Michael Solomon. Michael, welcome to our show.
Thank you. It's always great to be back with you, Susan.
Thank you. Well, let's start off with something that you think is very important, and that is the whole notion of what climate change is all about. You know, a lot of people believe, and very strongly they believe, that we're melting. There's a meltdown. Now, you said many things to me in the past about this. Is it a myth or is it real?
It's a scam. I wouldn't even call it a myth. I mean, it's not a myth, Susan. Yes, climate does change, but there's no reason why we have to believe that the world is in peril, because it's not happening. Climate's been changing. Put this in a very simple terms. The Earth is not a static place. Neither are any of the other planets in our solar system. When we found that out through space exploration, we live on a thin crust of a ball of hot magma spinning over 1,000 miles an hour, traveling around the sun at over 17,000 miles an hour. And this planet is dynamic. It's an active globe, and to expect it's not going to change after 3.5 billion years of existence is unheard of. It's got to change. The Earth, over the past millions of years alone, has proven that it's gone through drastic changes both in climate and geological terms. The physical planet is a gift to those who inhabit it, and we need to be prepared, but not if, but when changes come around. And we have to learn to live with these changes, not try to alter the will of God and Mother Nature, and it just doesn't work. You know, if we look back in recent history, and, you know, when we think of 4.5 billion years of recent history, I'm going back 50 years. In 1970, all the scientists were saying we're going to be in an ice age by the year 2000. In 76, they said global cooling is going to cause a world war by the year 2000. In 1989, they said global warming and rising sea levels will wipe the entire nations off the map. Wait a minute, that happened in 19 years? In 1990, they said we have less than 5 to 10 years to save the rainforests and the planet. I mean, it's ridiculous. And then in 2000, they said snow will soon be the thing of the past. There has been more snowstorms in the last 15 years than ever before. And now the latest thing in the world is 2012, global warming will cause more hurricanes. Well, since 2012 to now, there have been no hurricanes, only this year. And to think that global climate change, I won't even call it global warming, global climate change is going to change things is absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't cause hurricanes. It doesn't cause earthquakes. And what's happening, unfortunately, in Mexico and in the Caribbean in the last couple of months is not caused by global warming. It's impossible.
Deidre, you know, you and I have talked a little bit about the subject of global warming or climate change, if you will, and you must have a question for our guest, Michael. Now, Michael, I just want to say one thing before Deidre gets involved, and that is, isn't it a cyclical thing? When you talk about different kinds of weather and storms and this kind of thing, earthquakes, you name it, isn't it cyclical?
Absolutely, and it's been cyclical for 18,000 years that we've recorded it. We've gone back through ice core explorations in the Arctic and the Antarctic, and we have found that CO2 levels 18,000 years ago may have caused some of it. But if you look at the charts over the last 100 years, these are scientific charts. There's consensus science and there's actual science. Consensus science is 10 scientists get together and they says, well, based on all the theories that we have, maybe this is happening, so let's have a consensus and we'll vote on it. And everybody says, well, it looks good, so it's good. It doesn't work that way. Science is scientific. There is something in science that we learned in the 3rd grade, and it's called Archimedes' principle. Now, Archimedes' principle is very simple. It is the scientific principle of buoyancy and displacement. We all know what that means. When ice is placed in a glass or an ice tray in a freezer and it's frozen, it expands. When it's placed in water and it's expanded, it replaces its own weight. When it melts, the water level comes back to where it was. So with that in mind, and this is a scientific fact, it cannot be disputed, I'm going to make a statement right now, and it's absolutely true. If all the sea ice in the world melted overnight, and that includes the Arctic Circle and the Antarctic right now, all the sea ice, I'm not talking about glaciers on land, all the sea ice, we would not lose a half-inch of beachfront property anywhere in the world in the next 1,000 years. The people in Iceland are not worried about global warming. Where that's coming from is the Netherlands, because they're the lowest country in that Arctic area, in the northern European area, and they're worried that if everything melts, their seaports are going to get flooded. They're the only ones screaming the alarm. The people in Iceland have no care about it because this happens every year. They get melting and they get freezing, they get melting and freezing. There's nothing we can do about it. Nothing.
Deidre, let's let you jump in. You have a question for Michael?
So, Michael, your buoyancy theory is absolutely spot on, as we all know, because we learned this in school, and science is science, as you say. Facts don't change.
Yeah, it was Archimedes when he got in the bathtub. He screamed Eureka, and the water overflowed, if you remember. That's where the word comes from.
Exactly. So what would be, in your opinion, the purpose for people purporting the theory of global warming / climate change? Is it to fearmonger? Is it to put forth another agenda? What, in your mind, would be the purpose for all of the comments about
are you ready?
We're changing and we're gonna lose our beaches and our shorelines and our homes?
Money.
Money.
And I could prove that. I can prove that very simply. And here's how I'm going to prove it to you. Stephen Schneider, who was a leading proponent of global warming, said that scientists who want to gather the great funding in the world, have to make things bigger and more urgent than they really are in order to get funds to do their research. That's what he said. That is a fact. There's nothing you can do about that. There's nothing you can do about it. The other thing is that was a professor of Dalhousie University who also said the same thing, that we have to be consistent on what we tell the public to make things more scary than they really are, so that we keep it going. I have a direct quote from him, which I can give you. But anyway, that's part of the problem that today. Tim Wirth, who was on the chairman of the committee in the Senate, said the same thing. What he said was, even if we're wrong and we can't prove it, it's best that we spend the money anyway. Well, give me a break. You know how many billions, hundreds of billions of dollars we've spent on changing the climate, and you can't change it. It just doesn't happen. It can't happen.
Well, what about Al Gore in this situation? Because he's a proponent, certainly, of global warming, and people, he was the vice president of the United States, so people listened to him. What was his reason for talking about global warming? Would he want to create a situation where people started to get scared?
Remember what I said before? The one word that causes it was money. Al Gore, who was the former vice president of the United States, and David Blood, after the Kyoto Protocol was signed, formed a company and a corporation known as Generation Investment Management. They invest in green energy, and they broker carbon credits for countries that have corporations that operate within the framework of the Kyoto Protocol.
Michael, before you continue, I want you to talk about Al Gore. You said money, okay? I understand that. But, again, when you're in the position that he was in, for him to say things like that, not good. Not
well,
good.
he was. I'm going to tell you a story, and this I know for a fact because I know somebody who was there. I was in on a meeting because it was in the White House, and it was held between President Clinton. Al Gore was in there, and there was somebody from a holdover from who's from the first Bush administration talking about climate change. And what was said was that they encouraged the president not to send the bill to the Senate to approve the Kyoto Protocol. And one of the reasons he said that was he said that, Mr. President, I must tell you this, that if you do sign that bill, the United States is going to lose probably about 2 million jobs in the first year.
Wow.
And he turned to Al Gore and he said, is that true? And Gore's answer was that might be a conservative number.
Oh,
ugh. Wow.
The bill went to the Senate. The bill went to the Senate, and it was rejected. Okay, in 1993, Al Gore got on the case of the spotted owl in the northwestern lumber region of the country. It's Oregon and Washington, and he got on this case with the spotted owl, claiming that the spotted owl was endangered, and we've got to do something about it. So they passed a bill in Congress, and they called it what they did was they passed a law that the spotted owl must be given 2,500 acres for mating pair.
Huh.
To
who's going to pay for that?
In the woods. Well, let me tell you what it came to. 2,500 acres is 11 million square feet. Now, my bedroom was only 400 square feet, and it's not more than enough room for me to copulate in. But the owl gets 11,100,000 square feet. Okay, so what did they do? They shut down the lumber industry. 14,000 Americans lost their jobs. The forests grew denser and thicker, which created more forest fires because there were lightning strikes in there. We had to buy lumber from Canada at a 30% premium, so it cost the lumber industry a rise in expenses. So the cost of housing went up. It turned out that 20 years later, we found out that the spotted owl, that the harvesting of trees had nothing to do with the spotted owl's migration. The spotted owl just left because the barred owl, its cousin, was attacking them and forcing them out. It had nothing to do with anything else. And when the forest fires came, all the owls did was just fly away. The odd thing about the whole story, as I joke about it today, is the spotted owl migrates from Mexico, and I don't know if it's here legally or what, but but it's true. It's true. But getting back to what you said, part of what Al Gore did, as I started to say, he formed a company after the Kyoto Protocol was signed, and the company is called Generation Investment Management, where they invest in green energy and they broker carbon credits. A carbon credit is zero. You can't see it. It's like a BTU. Two companies that are operating in a country both get a share of what they're supposed to use for manufacturing. So let's say both countries, A and B, both companies get 150 units of carbon. Well, Company A has a very great year and they need an extra 50. Company B has a poor year and they are going to have 50 left over because their manufacturing is slower. You can buy the 50 from the other company to increase your manufacturing. Only you have to go through a broker. Well, guess who the broker is? Generation Investment Management. In 2014, according to Forbes Magazine and the Wall Street Journal, Mr. Gore and Mr. Blood, who are the two principals in this company, earned $218 million brokering carbon credits and green energy. That's a fact. There's nothing you can do to change that. And they're still earning that every year. Meanwhile, Al Gore still flies around in private jets, and he heats his 5 homes at a cost of about $36,000 a month. So the opening line in my new book, which is titled Allegory, is this. Is a story, and it's a definition in the dictionary of the word allegory, and it says a story, poem, or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral or political one. That's right out of Merriam-Webster's dictionary. So it's always amazed me how the word allegory almost sounds like Al Gore. So the question I leave my readers with is, do his actions fit the meaning? And when you think of his pomposity over the years, you must agree it certainly appears that way. But those are some of the problems. And the things that bother me is that he is pulling the wool over everybody's eyes. Everybody's. I mean, you look at the charts from 1980 to 2010. From 1980 to 2010, the temperature has actually gone down 1/2 of a degree. Now, it would have gone down more, and this is the average over those years. It would have gone down more except for two factors. In 1983, you had the El Chican Mexican volcano erupt, and in 1994, you had the Pinatubo Philippines volcano erupt. Actually, it was 1991. But if you take out those two factors and those two volcanoes, the temperature has actually dropped over 1 degree in the last 30 years. And here's the other problem. The NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the federal government, has set up temperature sensors around the world they call Stevenson screens. To give you an example, people can go online and actually look up where they're located. One very famously is located in Tucson at the University of Arizona, in the parking lot next to where trucks and everything else are parking, in a black macadam parking lot that gets baked all day long by the sun.
Oh, boy.
Another one is next to an aircraft, an air conditioning unit, and between that and a cell tower outside of a parking lot on concrete property where the air conditioner is blowing hot air on it all day long. That's another one. These are facts. The IPCC, the Interplanetary Climate Change Commission from the United Nations, placed one at the end of the runway in Rome, where planes are taking off and their engines are blasting hot air and gases right into it. And those are what's being used. Those are what's being used to determine the actual temperature, ground-based temperatures. Ground-based temperatures have nothing to do with global warming. What we have to do is take atmospheric temperatures from satellites. And the satellites have shown that the atmosphere is actually cooling over the last 11 years. Now, if you look at the satellite pictures of the Arctic Circle, according to NASA, these are not my pictures, this is not my saying, this is NASA photographs, and I could send you them. And the NASA satellites show that the Arctic ice grew in the last 2 years 533,000 square miles, over 29% growth in the Arctic over the last 1 year, and they expect it to grow 25 to 30% more year after year until the climate changes again in the next 35 years. We are in a 40-year cycle.
Yeah, but Michael, you have to ask yourself, why is it that so many people believe in this whole ideology of climate change?
Because it's a movement. It's a movement. It's like rock music, rap music, or anything else. It has become a movement. It is no different than the Moonies years ago or some cult. I mean, just think about it. That's exactly what it is. It's become a cult. It's scary how these people actually believe it. I mean, they actually believe it, and they're so hypocritical about it. Where are all these movie stars who are jumping on the bandwagon? Where are the DiCaprios who are jumping on the bandwagon of climate change? Why doesn't he fly commercial? Why does he have to take a private jet everywhere he goes?
Yeah, right.
Why do they have to have 15,000 square foot homes that they have to heat and cool for thousands and thousands of dollars every month? How come none of them have wind thermal generators in their backyard and live on solar energy? Because they don't.
Yeah, that's right. Deidre, what about your friends and the people that you know? Do they believe in climate change, or are they on the other side?
You know, there are probably, in my estimation, 50-50 on it. Because, Michael, you're making some very valid points that you're backing up with absolute truth and fact. Susan, to answer your question, again, most of the people in my world are 50-50 on it, and understand that there is a cyclical pattern involved here. I think, Michael, what you're really doing is pointing us in the direction of follow the money. And,
oh, yeah, absolutely. You don't know my background, Deidre. I used to be a detective in the Organized Crime Control Bureau. That's how we started every case. We followed the money.
Well, let me tell you, I confess I've done some homework about you, and I'm so impressed with you and your life and what you've accomplished. And I've done some homework on climate change. And to give a personal note here, I was just visiting with some friends in Michigan, and the husband in the marriage, had taken a tourist trip to Antarctica, where I believe my memory is correct, that ice cap is enlarging itself rather than shrinking.
Absolutely.
And,
as a matter of fact, I have the photos I have of Antarctica. I've told you about Antarctica. Last 3 months ago they claimed that this giant iceberg broke off because of global warming. Well, no, it didn't break off because of warming. It broke off because of freezing. It was too heavy. It just broke off. It doesn't break off when it melts.
Yeah. Well, and your point about Mother Earth, if I may use that term, changing constantly is absolutely true, as well as our solar system. It's like the human body.
Sure.
We have to constantly be in flux. So if I may, Susan, pose a question to
Sure.
Mr. Solomon, what do we do then to help assuage the fear and to counteract I'm going to use a very strong word, the propaganda that we're in some kind of warming cycle that's going to be completely disastrous for us? What do we do to help re-educate people?
Two things. Number one, we have to find people that are of like mind who have a platform. When you've got Hollywood who believes the rhetoric, and they have the platform, and they can stand up and they can make movies like Inconvenient Truth, which turned out to have 19 major lies in it that Al Gore made, and he won a Nobel Prize for. Give me a break. I'd like to know what he won a prize for peace for. We've got to find people with that kind of a background. Unfortunately, they're not there. I mean, it's just, who have the platform. I'm not trying to change people's minds. You can believe what you want. I'm just trying to take people who have some common sense and open their minds. There's no reason to change people's minds. I just want them to open their minds. I mean, when they tell me, the polar bears are extinct. Really? In 1972, there were 2,700 polar bears in the world. Why? Because we were hunting them for their furs. When we put a ban on hunting for their furs, today there are over 36,000. It's gotten so bad that they want to start hunting them again because they're coming into towns and they're a menace. They're attacking people.
Well, I noticed the same thing online, that the polar bears are thriving. So we're really coming down to, I think, an attitude, if I may propose this, that we're coming down to an attitude of how we have stewardship with Mother Earth. And while personally I'm not a proponent of taking advantage of Mother Earth, I'm a proponent of really honoring the planet. I think you're talking about something very different. I think you're talking about in the political arena where science and politics have gotten in bed together and have put something out there that obviously has non-facts in it. Am I reading you correctly, Michael?
Yeah, politics is confusing itself with science. And what's happening is, as I said, there are two types of science out there. There is real science and there is consensus science. I'm not going to call it junk science. It's consensus science. You get 10 people in a room and they all come up with an idea, and one guy's convincing and he says, well, what do you think about this? And they say, you may have a point there. Yeah, but that's still a hypothetical thing that's not been proven.
Right.
I mean, Archimedes is a proven principle, not a theory, a principle. You can't change that. It's like gravity. Now let me tell you something else. Last month, Al Gore was on Fox News, and he was being interviewed by Chris Wallace. And he said, I want to tell you how fast the ice is melting. He says, I was on the streets of Miami, and I actually saw fish swimming in the streets. He says, that's how fast the ice is melting. Well, let me explain why the ice is melting so fast. Number one, the ice is not melting. It's freezing. Number two, the reason that the tides are so much higher in Miami lately is because the moon that controls the tides, that wonderful heavenly body that circles the earth and controls everything we do, our whole gravitational pull, is closer to the earth than it's been since 1912. 1912 is a very important year. I'll tell you why in a minute. It is 21,000 miles closer to the earth. So what is it causing? It's causing higher tides. But what they don't tell you, it's also causing lower tides. But nobody's mentioning that part of the equation. Now, yes, is it possible that fish could be swimming in the streets? Absolutely. I used to have a Japanese koi pond in my backyard when I lived in New York. I had big fish in that. And there was a rainstorm one day where we must have had 4 or 5 inches of rain where the pond actually overflowed. And I had 3 or 4 fish that actually got out and were swimming around in a puddle on my lawn. I picked them up, put them back in the pond, drained some of the water out of the pond. That didn't mean the ice was melting in Antarctica or the Arctic Circle. But here's the other point. So I was screaming at the TV when I listened to this interview because I'm saying, okay, Al, where are the pictures? So I go on social media. I can't find a single photograph of anybody with fish swimming in the streets in Miami. Every newspaper in Miami would be on that.
Yeah. Well, last but not least, What is Trump's take on all this?
He's right. and the whole Paris Accord is very simple. The Paris Accord wants everybody to go to zero emissions by the end of the century. If we go to zero emissions, here's what happens. There is no carbon dioxide in the world. If there's no carbon dioxide in the world, there's no oxygen. If there's no oxygen, there's nothing. There's no humans because we need it. And all that Paris Accord is going to do is prevent the Earth from warming by 1/2 of a degree in the next 100 years. If you have one volcanic or two volcanic eruptions over the next 100 years, and believe me, there's like one a year somewhere in the world now, that's the only. Then that whole theory goes right out the window, and it's going to cost the United States close to $3 trillion for that treaty, and maybe 1.5 million or 2 million jobs.
Whoa!
That's a fact. That's a political and scientific fact. There is nothing we can do about it.
Now, let me just ask you, and let's wrap up the show on something that's very current, and that is Twitter is tweeting like crazy all of the information that our Mr. President Trump is saying about the NFL. So what's going on here? I mean, why is this happening? It seems like such a trite thing. Here we went from global warming, which is a major, major thing, to Trump saying something about the NFL, and explain it to our audience because I'm totally confused.
Well, it all started with Colin Kaepernick, who has no idea what's going on with race relations and everything else. Here's a guy who sat on a bench and didn't want to stand for the pledge for the national anthem, so he decided to get up and take a knee instead. Because why? Because he'd be in front of the TV cameras and he would make his point. His point was well taken because he was an idiot. The man has no idea what he's talking about, to be honest with you.
Oh boy!
Because especially now what happened this last weekend in London with the football players taking a knee in the UK. I mean, it just doesn't work. What they don't realize is here they knelt for the Star Spangled Banner, but yet they stood up for God Save the Queen. Well, guess what? They knelt for the Star Spangled Banner and they stood for God Save the Queen, but yet it was Britain and the UK who continued slavery in 1863. After we abolished it here, it was still going on around the rest of the world. It's still going on today. Mm-hmm. It's going on in North Korea. It's going on in African countries all over the world.
Well, Deidre, we don't have any more time, but I would like you to finish off on something that you'd like Michael to say.
Michael, if you were to sum up in just a few sentences how we can, as level-headed citizens, improve both of these situations, either with our thinking or with actions or both, what would you say to the general public? What would you say to our listening audience how we can make an effective change in our thinking about both of the topics that we've just discussed?
Turn off the news.
That's a very good way to end the show. Turn off the news. And you know what?
And when you hear something that you look at it and listen to it with an open mind. And we have to start teaching history again in schools. Kids have no idea what that flag stands for. They have no idea the blood and that our American boys and women have shed to protect this country. You know, I was once asked on Fox News by Neil Cavuto about, I had to go back about 10 years. He asked me if I could go back in history and meet one person in history, who would that person be? And I said, Neil, I've thought about this, and I'd like to meet the guy who fired the first shot in Concord, Massachusetts, that started this great nation. And he said, wow.
What a great reply. So, Michael, you're really talking about independent thinking, checking
Absolutely.
the facts first,
open mind. Just have an open mind
and clear education. so we can make our own informed decisions and choices and have informed opinions.
You know, every time I meet a friend of mine who's liberal and I say something or I try to give him some facts, his answer is standard. I find this with all the people. His answer is this: you don't know what you're talking about. I'm sorry, but I do. I've looked it up. I've read the books. I've written the books. And you know, listen, my publishers aren't going to publish my books unless my stuff in there is factual. And it is.
Yeah.
And
well, last but not least, there's a book that's called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And what they say in this book is criticism is futile because it puts people on the defense. But not when you have all the information, not when you have all the statistics, not when you have all the data. So I want to say to Michael, you've done your homework. I want to say to Deidre, you've done it too. And this has been a very interesting show, and I hope everybody listens to it. And Michael, if they want to get in touch with you, how do they do it?
They can just go to my website, successtalkinc.com. And that's Inc, I-N-C, not I-N-K, successtalkinc.com. And they could reach me there. They could read some of my descriptions of some of my presentations. And hopefully I'll be doing a TED Talk in the next couple of months. I'm not sure. We're still waiting to hear that, as you know, Susan. So that'll get me a little publicity out there. But
we hope so.
You've got
what
to...
about your next book, by the way? What's it going to be called?
Believe it, that's another novel. And as a matter of fact, the screenplay has already been written. The title of that book is Under the Divvy Divvy Tree. It's a love story surrounded by a medical mystery. Part of it's in French, French that you can understand, not something you're going to need a French-English dictionary to read. It's just about maybe 30 or 40 lines of French in the book, just to give you the flavor that the protagonist speaks French. But that hopefully will be another bestseller, I pray. The screenplay was already written for that for Hollywood, but we're waiting for that to get picked up, we hope.
Well, today my guests have been Michael Solomon, who's been a guest on my show several times, and we'd always like to have him back. And my guest host has been Deidre Regal. And Deidre, it's been great having you as a co-host, and we're going to do it again and again and again. So thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you for listening to The Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.